In him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. It occurs to me that even surrounded by the beauty of softly lit chandelier and candle glow, I'm not sure in this age that we truly appreciate light. It's something we take for granted, can take for granted. We flip on a switch at dusk without much thought, unless maybe we live in California. Light is just there. Solar, atomic, hydroelectric, coal, gas, but all products of that burning ball we call the sun. But there's been a kind of disconnect between the sun and all these gifts we so easily control. A teacher asked her class, which is more important to us, the sun or the moon? And one little fellow said, the moon. And when the teacher asked why he thought the moon was more important, the boy replied, well, the moon gives us light at night when we need it most. The sun just gives us light in the daytime when we don't need it. Not something we sense as absolutely essential to life itself. But the ancients knew it. They knew that light was the very gift of life. They knew it made the difference between warmth and freezing, between the flow of seasons and food to eat. They celebrated with great joy about this time of year the first faint signs that the light was returning for another time around. So it was really for them a powerful metaphor for the gift of life itself, especially the life that came in the babe of Bethlehem, in Jesus of Nazareth, in the blackness of despair and disease, in the dark dread of Roman domination. Here was a sliver of hope, a glimmer of light at the end of history's long tunnel. And the light, they knew, was more powerful than all the darkness in the world. A visitor to the Mammoth Cave complex in southern Kentucky tells of her experience being led into a huge cave room, giant cavity etched from the limestone by endless ages of rising and receding water. In this room, the tour guide gives the guest a taste of total, utter darkness. With everyone standing still, he turns off the lights. And she says it was truly a strange experience. Total darkness. You can't see the image of a person near you. You can move your hand as close to your face as you want. You still see nothing. She comments that the human being is simply not accustomed to that kind of darkness. And it's a strange experience. After you've experimented with that for a couple of minutes, the guide says, now, what if the power doesn't come back on? What if there's an electrical storm up there? What would we do? Well, let me show you what we would do. And the guide then produces a single match and lights it. One match. Enough light to make out the major contours of the entire room, enough light to identify the footpath, enough light to lead all 90 tourists back to the cave. Indeed, the darkness does not overcome light. She says it's totally transfixing experience. You can't take your eyes off that little match. It dominates the whole cave. Darkness all around, but the light is clearly the winner. And one greets it with the inner feeling that all is well once more. So what a beautiful metaphor it was way back then for the light that came in Jesus. For the light that came in him really is the light of the love of God. For like light, love is critical to life. Babes down at Cook County may be fed and changed, but not stroked and held. They may wither and die. No less the aged and lonely, unloved in some nursing home, die also of the disease of neglect. And we in between know more or less of life depending on how much we know of love. But the minute I use the word, I cringe, because the love that came in Jesus was no Hallmark card love, no sentiment bathed in on a holiday. It was hardly sentiment at all, rather difficult and strenuous. For this love meant not some heroic sacrifice at the beginning, but at the very least the willingness to embrace inconvenience on behalf of the needs of others. The story pictures God in his Son bending low to endure not just any existence, but the mean life of a peasant family in a difficult world on our behalf. This kind of love, which is the light of life, always comes with some self-denial, with some reaching out beyond self attached. And not only on the large stages of the world, but more often right under our nose in marriage and home and friendship. It's not easy, this kind of love. Even at Christmas, when the season sometimes brings a house filled with people who don't normally have to live together. Such was the case at Aaron's house. His parents rather let him run full throttle most of the time, and they'd become somewhat oblivious to the noise he would make. Grandpa, there for Christmas, on the other hand, cherished a house filled with peace and quiet. So when the two, Aaron and Grandpa, came together for Christmas, there was bound to be some tension, especially this year when Aaron's most prized present turned out to be a toy drum. Well, after a long day of listening to Aaron parade through the house banging on that new drum, his parents noticed all of a sudden a strange silence. They started towards Aaron's room when Grandma intercepted them and said, "I told your father not to do it, but he went ahead anyway." Aaron's dad looked confused, so his mother replied, "Well, you know your father. He went in there with his pocket knife and asked Aaron if he wanted to see what was inside the drum." Not always easy, even in the most intimate of settings, to bear and endure, which is what this love is all about. Just a small light, though, a small light that can make all the difference. A couple in our church tells how they experienced Christmas Eve last year in Minneapolis. A few weeks ago, Bob, a friend of theirs, had made a reservation for dinner at 7:30 at a restaurant in St. Paul and made a point about it being Christmas Eve. Reservations person assured him that they would be open. The seven of us arrived there at 7:30 p.m. on the 24th with the temperature at about 10 degrees below zero. The restaurant looked almost closed down as we entered, and the young woman at the door said they had closed, in fact, at 6 o'clock, but they knew about us and she would get the manager. The manager appeared, said he'd stayed open long enough for us to arrive, but that the reservations person had made a huge mistake about them being open. The kitchen was closed, everybody pretty much had gone home. He offered a $50 certificate for another night. We asked him what was still open. He suggested a few places, but Jill said she had driven by them and they were closed. Dad called our hotel, the desk person called around, but everything was closed. Restaurant manager said he did have some bread and brownies left, but he couldn't help us really. He and the rest of the staff were on their way out. We said, "We're from out of town, all of us. What should we do?" He paused a moment and then said, "Well, if I can rustle together some spaghetti marinara, would that be okay? And I can bring you a bottle of wine while you wait. I'll have to go look for the key to the freezer." Desperately hungry, we said, "Of course." He then sat us down at a big table, gave us a bottle of good wine and some bread with olive oil. 5 minutes later, he came in with a bowl of lettuce with roasted red and yellow peppers and a really quite good dressing. And then came the spaghetti marinara, which was okay. "Is all this okay?" he asked. As we were about to finish our second bottle of wine and the spaghetti, he brought out a bowl of tiramisu. "Would you like some of this? I just found it," he said. It really was good. Then finally we said, "Okay, how much do we owe you?" "Nothing," he said. "The computer is down, and because I'm the manager, I really don't need the money." We said, "We have to do something." He said, "Well, you can contribute to a fund for the immigrants who work in the kitchen, and you can write company headquarters. I'd really like that." But what was so great about the whole experience was how he really got into helping us. He posed for a photo with the spaghetti, talked a little bit about himself and family, seemed so happy to be giving. And the other few staff remaining came over to talk with us too, thus postponing their own Christmases. Of course, if you stop and think about it, they weren't really postponing Christmas at all, were they? The love which is the light means embracing inconvenience on behalf of the needs of those around us, the child embarrassed or alone, the friend in grief, the relative in pain, the co-worker anxious, the spouse worried sick. Such a small thing, like a little candle, but it can transform the darkness for somebody. We need to remember only that it's not really our light, it's His light. Robert Fulghum tells of Alexander Papaderos, teacher of Greek culture, politician, doctor of philosophy, and he says a remarkably complete human being. On the island of Crete, next to the mass graves of German and Cretans who fought each other so bitterly in World War II, Papaderos has founded an institute for peace, which has become the source of bridge building between the two countries. What kind of vision motivates a man like Papaderos to transcend the focus on his own self and dedicate his life to compassion and peace? When I was a small child, he said, during the war we were poor and we lived in a remote village. One day on the road I found the broken pieces of a mirror. A German motorcycle had obviously been wrecked in that place, and I kept one, the largest piece. And by scratching it on stone, I made it round. And I began to play as a boy with it as a toy. I became fascinated by the fact that I could reflect light into dark places where the sun would never shine, in deep holes and crevices and dark closets. It became a game for me to get light into the most inaccessible places I could find. I kept the little mirror, and as I went on growing up, I would take it out in idle moments and continue the challenge of the game. As I became mature, I grew to understand that this little mirror was a metaphor for what I might do with my life. I came to understand that I am not the source of light, I am not the light, but the light, truth, understanding, love is there, and it'll shine into dark places if I reflect it in my own person. I'm a fragment of a mirror whose whole design and shape I do not know, but I can reflect light into the dark places of this world and change some things and maybe some people, and perhaps others may see and follow. But only if we pass it on, you see. Only if we reflect that light in the dark places of life around us. A little girl was reciting her verses at the Christmas pageant. At least she was supposed to, but she got up in front of the crowd and her mind went blank. In the front row, her mother was almost as frantic as the little girl. The mother gestured and moved her lips, trying to form the words for the little girl, but it did no good. And finally, the mother, in some desperation, whispered the opening phrase of the child's piece, "I am the light of the world." And immediately the child's face lit up and relaxed. She breathed a sigh of relief, smiled as she said with supreme confidence now, "My mother is the light of the world." And so you are, mother and father and neighbor and friend. The light shines in the darkness still, if you will let it, and the darkness will never put it out. So now we come to the part of our evening together which I dare say we enjoy the most. We're singing just the first verses, you won't need the hymnals, of the carols you find listed in your order of worship. The first one, words by Charles Wesley, who wrote like almost 1,000 hymns. Incredible. The interesting thing about this carol is it took 120 years for us to find music to make it as popular as it is today. Music by Mendelssohn. Let us sing Hark the Herald Angels Sing. A coincidence, Joseph Sears, a disciple of Emanuel Swedenborg, a 19th century Swedish mystic, was instrumental in founding this congregation. Edward Sears, a disciple of Emanuel Swedenborg in Boston, not long before Joseph Sears came on the scene, wrote this hymn. It came upon a midnight clear. I would venture this is probably the earliest Christmas song you ever learned. It's always been known as Luther's cradle hymn, although it was written in Pennsylvania back in the 19th century, Away in a Manger. A traditional English carol, now 300 years old. It originally had 9 verses. We'll have to make do with one. The First Noel. Someday I would like to research which arrived first, the Christmas pageant or this carol written by John Henry Hopkins of Vermont, We Three Kings. All right, I've been singing this one for you for about 30 years. Only 30 years ago I didn't have to sing it 4 times, but But I sing it because it's not familiar here. It did not export well, but believe me when I say it is probably the most popular carol in Germany. O thou joyful day. Then the most popular American carol, Philip Brooks of Holy Trinity Church in Philadelphia in 1868 went to Bethlehem. Actually, he went in 1866, was so impressed by the experience that he came home and wrote this carol for the children of his Sunday school to sing in their pageant, O Little Town of Bethlehem.